All right, it's been a minute. I've been busy, but it's time to answer some questions that I've been sent in. I got a couple of these lined up, but today we got a question about the Magi. Let's go ahead and read the question about the Magi. So, got this text message from Faithful Christian. I'm looking into Magi in Matthew 2. I want to learn more about how they fit into Jesus' story. It seems they were more convinced in Jesus as king and doesn't mention they saw Jesus as God. I've wondered about this for a while. Were the Magi priests from another religion using astrology to find Jesus? Seems unlikely, but I know there's a big reason for them to be part of Jesus's birth. Hey, great question. Let's get into it. And there is a simple answer. But who wants the simple answer when we can get deep into the scriptures, shall we? All right, so in Matthew chapter 2, we're introduced to this mysterious group of visitors, the Magi. They come from the east, they follow a star, and they bring royal gifts to the child Jesus. Let's look it up in the Bible just to say that we're not actually making this up. So we see here, chapter 2 says, Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem saying, Where is he who's been born king of the Jews? It's important to recognize that they went to the king's house because that's where they expected the king to be born. Of course, we know that Herod was troubled when he heard this, that another king was being born. He said, hey, where is this Messiah, which means deliverer? He's getting a little freaked out. And when they saw a star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. They came to the house where they saw a child with Mary, his mother, and they fell to the ground and worshiped him. Then they gave him treasures. And then they were warned by God in a dream not to return to Herod. So they weren't supposed to tell Herod where they found the king of the Jews. Okay, so whoa, what does all this mean? Okay, who are these men, and why does Matthew, of all the gospel writers, include them in the birth narrative? So it raises the deeper question I want to explore today. Were the Magi pagan priests using astrology to find Jesus? And if so, would God include them in such a central moment of redemptive history? So let's first talk about who the Magi were. Now, the term magos, or plural magoi, my Greek is terrible, they originally referred to a Median or Persian priestly caste associated with Zoroastrianism. I practice that word all the time, and I always mess it up. Zoroastrianism. But by the first century, it had taken a broader meaning in Greek usage. The Magi were now seen as Eastern sages, these wise men. Often they were astrologers, and they were interpreters of dreams, and they were practitioners of what we might call proto-scientific divination. As a matter of fact, in Daniel chapter 2, he uses in the Septuagint the same Greek term for the Babylonian court magicians who served Nebuchadnezzar. That's in Daniel 2, if you want to look that up. So these weren't biblical prophets. They were part of a foreign religious system, one that God had explicitly warned Israel against imitating. He does it in Daniel. He does it in, Deuteronomy and Isaiah. He's like, listen, don't be like these people. And so scholars note that astrology, though forbidden in the Old Testament, had become really popular in the Greco-Roman world and was respected even among some Jews of that era. This is important to remember. Matthew introduces these figures without criticism, something highly unusual for a Jewish Christian text. And this suggests that Matthew is using their presence theologically. The Magi were most likely from Babylon or Persia, and that region not only had a significant Jewish population since the exile, but also a long-standing interest in astronomy and Jewish messianic expectation. Some scholars even point to the possibility that Balaam's oracle, a star shall shine, shall come out of Jacob in Numbers, have been preserved in Babylonian traditions and may have influenced their interpretation of the celestial event. So basically, they believe that these folks in Babylon knew the Jewish prophecies of the Messiah, so when they saw the sign, it made sense. So were they pagan priests? Most likely, yes, but not in the sense of active idol worshipers. They may have been Zoroastrian dualists, but they weren't polytheists. They were, however, religious outsiders who would have been excluded from temple worship in Jerusalem. So there's kind of the background of who they were. So that leads us to the star that led them and why they would have been following it in the first place. So Matthew tells us that they saw a star at its rising, as we just read in Matthew 2. This is an astronomical language. And so scholars say there's a couple different things this could mean. Some say that it was a comet, even Halley's comet, but that was off by, I don't know, a dozen years or so. So that probably wasn't that. Some scholars believe that there was some sort of planetary conjunction where planets came together, and so like this alignment of Jupiter and Saturn. But some think that's probably not it as well, even though that happened in 7 BC. Some believe it was like a nova or a supernova as recorded in Chinese sources around 5 or 4 BC. But many of these could have explained the Magi's initial journey, but Matthew 2, 9, and 10 complicates this a little bit. It says that the star moves and then stops over the place where the child was. So this isn't normal astronomical behavior. So many scholars conclude that while a real astronomical event may have started their journey, the final guidance to the house was supernatural. Similar to the Shekinah glory leading Israel in the wilderness in Exodus. And so God may have used a natural sign, a comet, a confluence of planets, or some other celestial event to get their attention. The real revelation came through divine providence, not stargazing or astronomy. And so what did the Magi believe? Now here's where we get theological. The Bible tells us that the Magi came seeking the King of the Jews, not a deity, which would have lined up with the Old Testament. They brought gifts suitable for a royal birth. They brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Those aren't offerings of worship in the temple. Their posture, falling down before the child, was a culturally appropriate act of homage to royalty, not necessarily divine worship. But Matthew invites us, his readers, to see more. He uses the verb proskuneo. Again, my Greek is terrible. I read it better than I. But the Greek word is to worship. And that appears later in the gospel when Jesus is worshiped by the disciples in Matthew 14 and Matthew 28. So the Magi may not have understood fully who Jesus was, but Matthew's audience does. So this child was not only a king, but the divine Son of God, God with us. So their limited knowledge is no barrier to God's grace. God met them in the categories they understood: stars, dreams, kingship, and led them to the truth. The dream in verse 12, where they're warned not to return to Herod, it shows that God was active in protecting them and the baby Jesus, and was communicating in terms they would recognize. God really meets us where we're at. So why are they in the story? Now here's the real heart of it. Why does Matthew include them? Well, theologically, their presence functions as a preview of Gentile inclusion in the kingdom. These outsiders respond in faith, while the insiders, Herod, the priests, the scribes, either resist or ignore. Matthew is setting the pattern for the rest of the gospel. In chapter 8, he tells that the Gentiles will be seated with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob while the sons of the kingdom are cast out. Chapter 21, the kingdom is taken from Israel and given to a people producing its fruit. In chapter 28, the disciples are commissioned to all nations. And so these magi are the first fruits of the Gentile mission. That's the first thing. The presence at the birth of Jesus is fulfillment of texts like Isaiah 60 and Psalm 72, where kings come to Zion bringing gifts and worship. Though Matthew doesn't quote those passages directly here, the imagery echoes them deliberately. The other part is for those in the culture of Judaism at the time who highly regarded this type of kingdom, the sages, the wisdom of the sages, the astronomy, the astrology. He's setting the stage that says those who honor astrology, those who honor this Babylonian kind of wisdom, even their wise people are recognizing that Jesus is King of the Jews. Just like how John was saying that the Greeks who sought the wisdom, ultimate wisdom of the Logos, Jesus is the ultimate Logos. Here, Matthew is saying that those people who are seeking signs, who are seeking this kind of this wisdom, this inside knowledge, this heavenly revelation, even they recognize that it's found in Jesus. So there's the cultural aspect to it. So what does this mean for us? Well, so were the Magi pagan astrologers? Yes. But they weren't just that. These were men searching for truth, and God sovereignly used their flawed system to lead them to the true King. That's the scandal and the beauty of the gospel. God doesn't wait for perfect understanding or doctrinal purity before he reveals himself. He calls unlikely people through unlikely means to do what Israel should have done, honor the Messiah. And so their story isn't an endorsement of astrology, but a testimony to God's ability to reach into broken lives and broken systems and draw out worshipers for Jesus. In Matthew's readers, and for us, it's a reminder that the kingdom of heaven belongs to those who seek with humble hearts, not just those with the religious customs. So thanks for watching. I hope this helps you understand not only who the Magi were, but why they matter. Their journey still speaks. Jesus is King of all nations, and even those who are far off can be drawn by the light of revelation. Hey, keep those questions coming. I'm sorry I haven't answered more of them. Keep them coming. I got a bunch queued up.